Hey friends, it's Johnny Morgan and I'm back and I have another bit of awesomeness from my archives, and I found this, the Jupiter-6 brochure, sales brochure from 1982, I think. And this is awesome because the Jupiter-6 was one of the first MIDI keyboards, and I do happen to own one. And so when I was a kid, obviously I collected these, as I told you, and I found this in my archives, and I was just going to show you a little bit inside it. It's not too deep, it's just one page, but some cool information in there. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this one. Okay, here we are with the brochure, and as you can see, the synth on the cover, it's pretty plain and clean design, and a bit of a different font style for Roland. Of course, we designed the future. I'm not quite sure when they started putting that on their products, but that was kind of a catchphrase they used for many years. And let's open it up. And there it is, the Jupiter-6. And this was a synth release to sort of compete with the sequential Prophet 5. So it's a 6-voice. And the goal was it to be cheaper than the Jupiter-8, but give you the polyphony of 6 voices and similar features that you'd get to a Prophet, if not a little bit more. Of course, the modulation capabilities are different. The Prophet had the polymod, and this one had, it did have assignable LFOs, Jupiter-6. So yeah, and not too much here, just going over sort of some of the details on the Jupiter and some of the modes you can do, split in unison mode, that sort of thing. They talk about the memory, which is a big thing. Obviously, storing patches in memory wasn't new, but it was relatively fresh at that point, and pretty clean layout. And it talks about sort of the VCOs and the manual section, and you can sync the VCOs, which is nice. And then here, rear panel diagram, not really a picture, but it does show the MIDI connector, which was new on this synth, and very new. In fact, the Jupiter-6 was one of the very first MIDI synths. I think the sequential Prophet 600 was also a new one, and Roland and Sequential sort of decided to team up and create MIDI amidst a bunch of controversy. And the Jupiter-6 and the Sequential Prophet were famously interfaced at a NAMM show and talked to each other for the first time ever. 2 different manufacturers, so it was just pretty cool. But they don't really talk a lot about MIDI here. And then on the back, the specifications, and I always find these back pages pretty interesting because you get to see some of the other synths that were out at the time and that they were marketing. Of course, the Jupiter-8 and the Juno 60 and the Juno 6, and those all talked, these two talked via DCB interface, and the JX3P and the Jupiter-6 now talked with the MIDI interface. As you can see, they've got a little box here that describes what MIDI is all about and how you connect the two. And I think that's pretty cool because that's actually the first time they really talk about it. And so it's just a tiny little small box, so I'm not even sure Roland knew whether it would fully take on amongst all the manufacturers, but nonetheless they were sort of talking about it here, and that's pretty interesting. So, and then some of the specifications, they don't really go into the chip design on the synth or anything like that, even though we know this is Curtis chips, and it does sound quite a bit different than the Jupiter-8 as a synth goes. So even though it's pitched as a lot of people consider Jupiter-6 to be the little brother of the Jupiter-8, it's not really at all. It's a totally different synth. I mean, the layout is somewhat similar, but the synth itself sounds, quite, I would say, thinner and more gritty. It's really good for techno, and obviously made famous by one of my favorite bands, Orbital, on a lot of their early albums. Okay, that's the Jupiter-6 pamphlet that I've saved up since the early 80s as a kid, looking at synthesizers And I'm gonna go put it back in my box now with all the other brochures. Okay, thanks for listening.